True crime cases can get particularly scary when nothing is as it seems. Watch closely as this woman receives her sentence.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Ezra Jay McCandless, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in the information.
Does she look guilty to you? What about this one?
Having reviewed the evidence and applied the law thereto, now finds you guilty on the indictment charging you with the involuntary manslaughter of the person Conrad Roy III.
Indeed, we're used to women being the victims of so many vile monsters. But what happens when a cold-blooded killer hides behind a pretty face? Otherwise, let's dive in. Today's case begins on March 22nd, 2018, with a frantic knock on a farmer's door. When he opens the door, he found an agitated woman desperate to come inside. This was Eau Claire, Wisconsin. This is a gorgeous town of some 70,000 people. Its name literally means clear water, and it's not exactly wrong. It's a beautiful, peaceful place. So when the farmer, Don Sipple, found the young woman on his doorstep, he wasn't expecting trouble. This wasn't the kind of place where people are used to crime. But everything was off about that girl. She was covered in blood and mud. She wore no shoes, and she was full of bruises. Don invited her in and called 911, asking an ambulance to come and offer some help to this poor girl.
This is Don Sipple calling, and I have a young lady that just came to my house, and somebody attacked her, and she needs a doctor. Her clothes are all torn,
And what is the address you're located at?
What?
What is the address you are at?
E7614, 430th Avenue.
Okay. And is she injured?
Yeah, she's injured. Her mouth is kind of got some blood around it, and her clothes are all torn.
If that wasn't off enough, listen to her reaction when the dispatcher wants to know her name.
My house here just recently.
Okay. And can you ask her what her name is?
Just hold on a second.
Okay.
What's your name, ma'am? What? You don't know? She's in kind of bad shape. She just says she don't know.
Do you know how you're supposed to help the police find your attacker? Well, in Ezra's case, she was anything but cooperative. With Dawn, she would cry and refuse to answer any questions, saying she was just in a state of shock. This behavior continued with the officers when they arrived at Dawn's farmhouse. But when the police took her to the hospital and pressed her for a name, she gave them the name of the attacker, Alex Woodworth, her ex-boyfriend. But she wouldn't say anything else, and she insisted that the cops brought someone to be with her, a certain Jason Mengel. He was her current boyfriend or some sort of love affair that she seemed to have at the moment. But before the investigators did anything to please this mysterious, non-talkative woman in distress, they decided to do some digging. Ezra Jay McCandless was born on October 6, 1997, to a 14-year-old mother. Her actual name was Monica Kay, but when she was a teenager, she became obsessed with the Into the Wild character, Alex McCandless. Alex was a social outcast who left society to live in the wild. Eventually, he starved to death. But that didn't mean much to Monica. She wanted to become Alex McCandless. So when she turned 18, she changed her last name to McCandless, honoring her favorite character. This is also when she moved to Eau Claire. Ezra also started identifying as a boy, but soon switched back to being a girl again. Then she became passionate about art and would post about her projects online. Her life changed in 2017 when she met an Army Reserve medic called Jason Mengel. He was 13 years her senior, but seemed like a match made in heaven, at least at the beginning. After 8 months of passionate dating, the two moved in together and started talking about marriage. During these happy times, they would spend many of their evenings at Racy's, a downtown coffee shop in Eau Claire. This is when Ezra's eyes fell on Alex Woodworth. Alex was 23 years old. He worked part-time as a barista at Racy's. and he also worked as a substitute teacher. Teaching was his dream and his qualification, but he dreamt of exiting the school system and teaching university-level philosophy. Alex was the dreamy, friendly, animal-loving guy that Jason wasn't. But if you're gonna start a new relationship, just break up with your partner, right? Well, Ezra decided to have an affair with Alex, unbeknownst to Jason. Ezra would also brag to her friends that her new relationship had a kinky BDSM layer to it. But it wasn't too long before Jason found out, so he gave her an ultimatum, a classic me or him. However, Ezra replied, none. She broke up with them both. Soon after, in February 2018, Jason left for a 2-week military training. He came back on March 1st, only to find a very distressed Ezra at home. She told him she'd been sexually assaulted by one of his best friends. That day, Jason rushed to the police station to report the incident. Needless to say, the police wanted to get a statement from the victim herself.
And then I got really drunk. Almost blackout drunk, and I was throwing up. And he had me go upstairs when I started throwing up, and he took me upstairs. And he put me in his bed, and I was throwing up. I just remember a lot of, I don't know, it's a big mess of a bunch of fumbling and stuff. And it was awful.
Did you tell Jason what happened?
I told him everything tonight.
Okay. But at that time when it happened, you didn't tell him. Okay.
Ezra said she didn't report the incident when it happened because she was ashamed and afraid. This is not far-fetched. Many sexual assault victims feel this way afterward. But the police decided to look into Ezra's phone records anyways, to gain some more information about the attacker. And they found the many flirty, suggestive texts she had sent him. But Ezra never mentioned those. She just made it sound like it was a sudden attack. Ezra also told the cops that she had slept with Alex a few times while Jason was away on military training. So the officers spoke to Alex. And here's another plot twist. Alex said she knew about Ezra sleeping with another guy, but it was consensual. She just told Alex that she regretted sleeping with him. Well, that's a pretty nasty move. The police dropped the investigation case as it was pretty clear that this was just Ezra being Ezra. But now she wanted to get back together with Jason. In fact, she hoped that painting herself as a victim might help her win him back. But Jason saw through her lies and found out that she was still seeing Alex, so this time he broke up with her and told her to leave the apartment. So in March 2018, Ezra went back to living with her parents. But she wasn't done with Jason or Alex. Her mind was now set on revenge. On March 22nd, Jason was having a cup of coffee at Racy's. That's when Ezra popped in and surprised him. He had no idea she was in town. She wanted to show Alex her newest art, she said. She drove her car to Alex's apartment building, but Jason had a really weird feeling about Ezra's plan. Something in her voice sounded dishonest. So he cycled over to Alex's home, then proceeding to cycle around the block, wondering whether to go in or not. At this point, a local janitor saw this and dialed 911, thinking Jason was suspicious. But Jason ended up speaking to the cops on the phone, explaining the situation.
It's my girlfriend's car, or my ex-girlfriend. We're kind of in a situation, and when she talked to me this morning, I was worried because the guy that lives there is involved in an assault case that she's with. Or
she's the victim of?
She's the victim of an assault that happened, and when she went to him for consolement, I was gone on military orders.
Jason went on to explain the whole situation between them, as complicated as it was. But the bottom line was, he was worried she was going to do something bad to or with Alex.
Some stuff, and I was paranoid because she had like fire in her eyes.
Okay.
So,
Who's the girlfriend?
Ezra McCandless.
Okay.
I was just worried because
was the door standing open over there when you got there on the car?
I knocked like 3 times. I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear a scuffle or anything. So, knocked, yelled, opened the door, and I heard her say, "Let him help you." let him help you. So then I said, hey, is everything okay? Is everyone all right now?
Jason eventually said he was probably just being paranoid because he's a military doctor, so he's used to seeing weird incidents. That afternoon, the police caught up with Ezra and made sure that she and Alex were fine.
Hey, here?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody called us kind of worried because they saw Jason come over here and he was going in the car and they weren't sure what was going on.
No, everything's fine.
Everything's fine? Okay.
Jason cycled away, the police drove off, and Ezra was left with Alex in her car. Within an hour, Ezra killed Alex. Skip ahead a few hours to Ezra being interrogated. Remember, she had turned up on Dawn's doorstep covered in blood and mud, pointing her finger at Alex, but saying nothing more? She said she didn't remember how she got into a fight with Alex, she didn't remember how or where or when he attacked her, or what happened afterward. When the cop asked her how she got to Dawn's farmhouse, she said,
I just kind of felt like I woke up and I was scared, so I was just walking down the road.
What do you remember about that?
I remember being cold.
Okay.
Ezra might have been in shock, right? But when detectives set out to find Alex Woodworth, he was nowhere to be found. So they went to Dawn's farmhouse and tracked Ezra's muddy footprints from there. It was a pretty clear path all the way to her artsy car. There was a body hanging out of the back seat. Alex had been stabbed 16 times. Then Ezra discarded him on the back seat and ran to the nearest house, claiming she'd been assaulted by the very man she'd just murdered. When the police confronted Ezra about the body, she suddenly seemed to remember the attack. She said Alex carved the word boy into her arm, as a reminder that she once identified as a boy. The detective simply asked Ezra to confirm the positions in the car again. She said she was driving and Alex was in the passenger seat. So how did he grab her left arm with his right arm and carve it while she was driving? That's when Ezra admitted it to doing it herself. Then she completely changed her story. She said that they were sitting in the back seat when Alex pulled out a knife, attacked her, cut off her clothing, and tried to violate her. So she managed to grab his knife and stabbed him 16 times. If you grab a knife from an attacker, you usually hurt your hands really bad. Ezra didn't have any injuries on her hands, and Alex also had no defensive wounds on his body, and he'd been outside Ezra's car. Her car was completely clean on the inside. Ezra's lies came to an end in April 2018 when she was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional murder. During her trial in 2020, Ezra maintained that she was an innocent victim of a horrific assault and that she simply defended herself from Alex, just like her dad had taught her.
What I recall my dad telling me, he told me many times, and he would always tell me, when you're in a situation with an individual or if someone's attacking you, that you need to do anything and everything you can to get away, to defend yourself. And he would tell me about, you can use knives, you can scratch, you can kick, you can fight.
Then Jason came in to testify, and you can see an interesting reaction here. She hadn't seen him for 18 months, and she couldn't hide her happiness. But his testimony did not help her.
Why did you go looking for the defendant?
Something did not seem right.
After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury had a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Ezra Jay McCandless, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in the information.
Before she received her sentence, Ezra expressed a long, tearful apology to Alex's family.
How sorry I am that they have lost their son. But sorry doesn't cut it in my mind. That word is not enough and never will be enough for this loss. And I recognize that.
There might have been a few crocodile tears, but the judge was very clear about her sentence.
She boiled over at some point and killed Alex Woodworth. And it was not in self-defense, and she lied about what happened, which is frankly not that uncommon. I am going to sentence Ms. McCandless to life in prison in the Wisconsin prison system, and I'm going to set the date that she would be eligible for petitioning the court for extended supervision at 50 years. It's a long time, but the way I reason this, that Ms. McCandless, if she does what she's supposed to do, follows the rules, that she at least has some light at the end of a very long tunnel.
Indeed, if you can't follow the rules in life, then you're gonna learn to do so in prison. But Ezra didn't seem ready to learn any lessons. On her Instagram page, dirt_find, she wrote a long post about how she and her family will never stop until she gets justice. And in her mind, justice is a new chance at a free life, as she is not guilty of murdering Alex Woodworth. It's a tragic, senseless case. An innocent life was taken just because a deranged killer wanted to get back together with an ex who didn't want her anymore. Sadly, it'll probably be a long time until Ezra changes her violent, dishonest ways. Our next story takes place in Mattapoisett, Massachusetts. It's home to just over 6,000 sea-loving people. A tiny, peaceful town full of boats and windproof hats. In 2014, Mattapoisett was the home of 18-year-old Conrad Roy. Just like his family, he was into boating and an avid supporter of the Red Sox. Conrad spent a lot of time cooped up in his room, recording his inner struggles.
This is Conrad Henry Roy III, reporting to you about what's going on through my mind, what's going on through my head the last few days. What I am doing is I'm looking at myself so negatively.
Despite his royal name, Conrad had a rough start in life.
Through a number of issues. His parents divorced. There was allegedly some domestic violence in their relationship. His grades were really struggling in school. He had a history of depression and anxiety. In fact, he had been hospitalized previously for a suicide attempt.
By the summer of 2014, Conrad was at a really low point in his life. He was 18, yet he was completely alone. He saw his peers coupling up or heading off to new states or countries for school. So he felt more and more of an outcast.
The face of this earth is no good, trash, will never be successful. Never have a wife, never have kids, never learn. But I have a lot to offer someone.
2 years before, Conrad met Michelle Carter on a trip to Florida. She was 1 year his junior and lived nearby in Plainville. The two clicked immediately, but for all the bad reasons. Michelle was also a social outcast, and she had struggled with depression throughout her whole life. She had also developed a nasty eating disorder and felt increasingly alone in this world. But she was putting on a true show on the outside.
He didn't believe that she was well liked, yet she was voted class clown. She was voted most likely to brighten your day. There was a discrepancy between what she was feeling with this depression and what was actually going on in reality.
And Michelle and Conrad weren't alone. They had each other. They considered themselves a couple, albeit a long-distance one. They only communicated online or on the phone, even though they lived about an hour's drive away from each other. This is why there are no photos of them together. And they wouldn't flirt with each other or give each other compliments. Most of the time, they spoke about their inner struggles and complained about how they had no joy in their lives.
I found the relationship rather tragic. When you have two individuals who are both vulnerable for different reasons, who both have been through different traumas, who both really are fragile, it can have tragic consequences.
On July 12, 2014, Conrad drove to a Kmart in Fairhaven. There, he rolled up his windows and turned on a water pump, which filled his car with lethal carbon monoxide. Within a few minutes, he was dead. Conrad's family had always known he was struggling with depression and anxiety, but they were not prepared for him to take his own life. Conrad's mental health plummeted during the last months of his life, ever since he made that first video recording. So his family was desperate to understand what pushed him to take such drastic action.
Anytime teenagers, anyone minors, they die, it's a tragedy. whether they die through in being involved in some act or whether it's suicide, whatever it is, it's so sad. It feels like, once again, we have failed our youth.
When the police got involved, they tracked down Conrad's last actions in July 2014. As it turns out, he'd left notes to both his parents and to Michelle. When the police spoke to Michelle, she was an emotional wreck. She constantly posted about how much she missed her boyfriend, and she spoke to his family during his wake. She even went on to organize a baseball fundraiser for Conrad. She really looked like the perfect grieving girlfriend. But the police didn't just look at Conrad's notes. They also searched his phone conversations. That's when they discovered the true nature of his girlfriend. So they visited her at her high school, interviewing her by herself, as she had just turned 18.
We were looking into Conrad's unfortunate passing. We did determine a little bit that you probably had a lot of contact with him.
Yeah.
Maybe even right up until pretty close to the time in which maybe he stopped having contact with anybody.
Michelle said Conrad did talk about taking his own life a lot, but that she told him not to do it, as he had a lot of people in his life who loved him. This is true. She even encouraged him to seek therapy. Except Michelle quickly did a 180 on her discourse. Before long, she was encouraging Conrad to take his life, and even belittling him for being a coward.
It's now or never. You better not be me and saying you're going to do this, then purposely get caught.
Shockingly, Michelle even texted Conrad about carbon monoxide poisoning. She told him when to do it and how.
Carbon monoxide poisoning. This method of is incredibly uncommon when it comes to adolescents.
When the cops asked Michelle if she spoke to Conrad on his last day, she said she didn't. But they literally had transcripts of her telling him to do it and berating him for postponing it for so long. One of her final messages to him was,
says, "You're ready and prepared. All you have to do is turn the generator on and you'll be free and happy." In one of their final exchanges, Carter writes, "So, it's time."
Normally, texts aren't responsible for someone taking their life. But what happens when someone pushes you every single day to do it, knowing you're struggling?
Consistently badgered him and came very close to belittling him for not being able to stand up and take this action. All the way up until the day of his death.
It gets worse. The moment Conrad rolled up his windows and turned up the water pump, he started having second thoughts. He wanted to get out of his car, but he panicked and he called Michelle. Guess what Michelle told him? To stop being a wuss and get back in the car. Michelle stayed on the line until she heard Conrad draw his very last breath. Following this horrifying discovery, some fundamental laws were questioned, such as, can someone be charged with murder if they weren't at the scene?
She didn't have like a knife, but rather she was the weapon. She speaking to him and what she was telling him and her words were the weapon that caused his death.
So Michelle was indicted for Conrad's death, deemed involuntary manslaughter. But now Conrad's grieving family and anyone following the case were desperate to understand Michelle's motive.
I think what she had to gain by this was attention. People would see her as helpless, as this grieving girlfriend that just went through something incredibly traumatic and rushed to her aid. And that is exactly what happened.
Michelle never thought that the police would dig into this teenage, and she never expected anyone to read her awful messages. But Conrad did one last thing before he took his life. He deleted every single message on his phone, except those from Michelle. Was he trying to send a message? Michelle's trial was a complicated one. On the first hand, this was a first ever case centered around a person arrested for texting someone to take their own life. On the second hand, Conrad had a medical history of depression and anxiety.
The primary argument against this being manslaughter was that this was not encouragement, it was an endorsement of an existing plan. This young man, unfortunately, would have committed whether she opened her mouth.
There was another twist. Michelle asked for a bench trial. This means that the judge is the jury. Being a completely new kind of case, Michelle figured having to only convince one person of her innocence might work in her favor. On June 6, 2017, during her trial, the prosecution simply read out her messages.
Tonight is the night. It's now or never. You better not be me and saying you're going to do this, then purposely get caught.
The defense team, on the other hand, kept talking about Conrad's mental health issues, as well as Michelle's. They portrayed her as a vulnerable teen who suffered from depression and eating disorders, and who didn't really know what she was doing. They even said that Michelle was on antidepressants that were making her delusional. She thus genuinely believed that she was helping her boyfriend. But Michelle was prescribed one of the most common antidepressants, which was not associated with manic episodes or such dramatic mind alteration. When the judge reached a conclusion, he mentioned Michelle's last phone conversation with Conrad, the one where she told him to get back in the car and take his life.
That Mr. Roy was struggling with his issues. However, he breaks that chain of self-causation by exiting the vehicle. She instructs him to get back into the truck, which she has reason to know is or is becoming a toxic environment inconsistent with human life.
Michelle was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, a much lighter sentence than usual for manslaughter cases. This is simply because all she did was talk to Conrad. In January 2020, Michelle was released from prison due to exemplary behavior. She is now 24 and keeping a super low profile. Good luck to her finding a boyfriend now. Our last story takes place in Highland Heights, Kentucky. Shayna Hubers was born on April 8, 1991. She was a straight-A student who took extra classes and prided herself on being a perfectionist. But that type of personality can have its downsides. Shayna's family remembers her taking rejection very hard, especially when it came to boys breaking up with her. In 2011, Shayna was working towards a master's degree in school guidance counseling, but that year something threw her off track. She fell in love with 28-year-old Ryan Poston. He sent her a Facebook friend request after noticing her profile picture, and the two immediately hit it off. Ryan was also a perfectionist, workaholic, and a successful lawyer, just like the rest of his family. He was close to his whole family, which included 2 fathers, after his mother remarried and stayed friends with Ryan's biological dad. Shayna and Ryan's first date was on Shayna's 20th birthday at a Lexington bar, but Ryan wasn't the only one invited. Several of Shayna's friends were there, and they gave a pretty creepy account of what happened that night. Shayna ignored her friends and obsessively focused on Ryan, trying to tie him down into a committed relationship from the very first hours of meeting in person. Ryan was a bit put off by this. Also, he was working in Cincinnati at the time, and he was just at the start of his career. He wasn't going to throw that away for someone he just met. The two did start to date, but they were pulling in opposite directions. Shayna wanted to settle down, and Ryan wanted to take it slowly and focus on his work. Ryan tried to break up with Shayna a few times, but she refused to hear it. She texted her friend, "He says he's only with me because I make him feel so awful about it when I cry." They were together on and off for about 1.5 years. Desperate to get out, Ryan rallied up his cousin, Carissa, to break it off with Shayna. He hoped that they could speak girl to girl and Shayna would understand why she had to let him go. In a text to Carissa, Ryan complained that Shayna kept coming to his home and refusing to leave. Sheesh. One of their last dates in October 2012 was at a shooting range, as per Ryan's passion for guns. This is what Shayna wrote to her friend afterward. "A part of me wanted to turn around and shoot him. I wonder why he's taking me on dates and stuff. LOL. I'm not going to turn down learning to shoot a gun. Haha, if that's not downright creepy, I don't know what is. By October 2012, Ryan was done with Shayna, but their on and off relationship meant that he hadn't officially broken up with her, nor had his cousin. Ryan set up a date with another woman, Audrey Bolte, who was that year's Miss Ohio, but he didn't tell Shayna about it. He was just hoping that this would convince her to back off. Tragically, it did the exact opposite. Shayna found out about their date through Facebook, and she was infuriated. Wait till you hear how she found out. She noticed Ryan had a new Facebook friend. She saw it was a woman, and she befriended her. Then she talked to her and faked friendship so as to find out about her plans that week. That's how she knew she was going to meet Ryan. Afterward, she became desperate to get Ryan back. She would text him fake emergency situations to have him come to her apartment. On October 12th, she feigned a heart attack and texted him to visit. When he didn't, she visited his flat just before he was supposed to leave for his date. Ryan never made it out of his apartment.
County 911. Ma'am, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense. What did you kill him with? A gun, a loaded gun in the house. Can you tell me where the gun is right now? The gun is in the house. I laid it on the bookshelf. Where are you? I'm standing about 2 feet from his dead body. Okay, are you sure that he is dead? He's dead, ma'am. He's completely dead.
Shayna said she started pleading with the dispatcher, saying she was not a murderer. She just had to save her life from her monstrous boyfriend. She even added that Ryan had hit her before. She concocted the story in the 15 minutes between killing Ryan and calling 911. When the paramedics arrived, they found that Ryan had been 6 times. Outrageously, Shayna said she shot him 4 times. Then when she saw him twitching on the floor, she shot him 2 more times because he was going to die anyway. What? Shayna was arrested at the scene. During the interrogation, Shayna spoke by herself for hours without being prompted by the cops.
Obsession with guns killed him. You know, I would have never, I'm so Democrat, I would have never touched a gun in my life until I did.
Yep, she blamed Ryan for getting murdered. She also portrayed herself as a victim of his abuse and as an angel of mercy for fatally shooting Ryan when he was twitching. During her trial, it was revealed that Shayna broke into Ryan's house that evening. Ryan also hadn't touched the gun that day. Ryan's neighbors also reported hearing gunshots, but no fight or struggle. So Shayna took him by surprise. After the trial, Shayna apologized to her family for having to spend so much money on attorneys. She never said sorry to Ryan or his family. In 2015, Shayna was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder.
Just like in our first case, Shayna continued to act like a victim, disappointed by the trial's outcome. Ryan's family, ironically, a family of attorneys, were pleased with the verdict, though.
Ryan believed in the justice system, always, always, and it has not failed him.
Still, isn't it truly sad when the killer never acknowledges their guilt? Thanks for watching, you guys. Hey, don't be shy. Make sure you like this video and subscribe for more. Till next time, and keep yourself safe.